welcome Bernie. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and your artistic practice?
Sure. Well, my name is Bernie Diaz, and I am chair of the art department. I'm also a faculty member here teaching art appreciation. First gen college student, first gen American, first gen instructor, first gen artist. I've been making art for a long time, since I was in high school. Went to a couple of schools, got my MFA, and have been working with this particular body of work for the last 4 or 5 years. Small scale paper-based assemblages that are rooted in 3 kind of conceptual frameworks that have to do with omission, embellishment, and revision, usually tied to kind of ideas around historical narratives, personal narratives, and how things tend to move or get lost as we continue to add on to the stories that we pass down to one another for a variety of reasons.
So the works that we have in this show are Paper Trails and Grapados. Can you just go into those a little bit further?
So Paper Trails is a title that I've been using since I was in grad school, where I was making larger format compositions on walls. Basically these cardboard-based murals that could move and were nomadic in a way. And that has changed to these smaller works. After pandemic, or during pandemic, the work got a lot smaller because of the amount of, the limited space that we had while we were in isolation. We didn't have access to a lot of material, and some of us just didn't want to go out to get those things. And now what I find myself doing is actually getting rid of paper rather than buying paper. So those utilize words and images that I collected. Some of them are mine, some of them are found, some of them are, culturally relevant to who I am as a person. And I think here in the term culture is like broad, right? As a Mexican American, as a queer person, as a first gen person, as someone that makes art and is embedded in that culture. And then some other things are just things that I encounter through reading or collecting magazines or reading comic books or collecting images from the internet and archiving those and using them for the work. Part of it is thinking about how we modify stories, how we accept and adopt stories as part of our identities, and how ultimately they end up affecting the ways that we perceive the world and the way that we may act on the world. So it's kind of like these abstract studies of a very abstract experience. The Grapados series is a bit more directly associated with this concept of uncertainty, because the work itself is produced through uncertain terms, meaning that as I'm making, I'm allowing for those things that I mentioned earlier, usually the consumption of some type of media, because we mediate our world through this media. And I allow for that, the stories that I'm listening to, the music I'm listening to, the things that I read, to enter into the work. And that's the area in the space where I draw out iconography, symbols, patterns, colors, and those kind of things. And so the other thing that is different about the Grapados series is that a lot of them work along a very rigid horizontal axis or repetition of verticals. And that is kind of associating with a couple of things that I'm also kind of trying to allude to without directly referencing, the way that glyphs tend to kind of be organized along these registers, or the way that comics tend to be registered along these kind of grid systems, or even the way that video games, early video games, specifically scrolling video games, were also kind of this left to right legibility. Growing up as a creative kid, the source of, I guess if you want to call it inspiration or point of reference, was never a museum, it was never a gallery, because we didn't have access to those spaces. For us, that visual culture did come from places like cartoons, like video games, or the drawings that my dad would make for us, right? That were much more cartoon oriented, much more comic oriented than they were, let's say for example, an oil painting in a gallery.
The show is exploring uncertainty, and you've sort of touched on how this work explores uncertainty a little bit already, but is there anything else that you want to add about that specific facet of it?
The sketching happens in the moment while we're moving things around and planning things out, and there are moments of frustrations where I have to sit with an unfinished work because I am unsure where that moves forward. How do I want these pieces to interact, and how do I want the pattern, the text might include, or even kind of like little secret codes that I might embed into the compositions to work together. And a lot of that has to do with this uncertainty, this question of uncertainty. Thinking about also the way that an audience member or a viewer of the work might receive the work. I'm always thinking about what will this ultimately look like when it's installed together, when it's being assessed and evaluated and experienced by someone else, and ensuring that I am not giving up too much of why I make these works, not allowing too much of that to move through to the viewer. I still want this work to open up a space where anybody can approach the work and make sense of the work on their own terms.